Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, which is access technology for audio description and captioning. My name is Pádraig Naughton. I'm Executive Director of Arts and Disability Ireland. Arts and Disability Ireland, for those of you who don't know, is the national development and resource organisation for arts and disability. In the Republic of Ireland, we say we champion the creativity of artists with disabilities and promote inclusive experiences for audiences with disabilities. And that we do in partnership with the art sector, primarily here in Ireland. Today's webinar is about access technology for audio description and captioning. I suppose one thing I do need to say at the outset that we have three organizations or companies who sell equipment, and they, you know, in their field, they are leaders in their field, but they're not the only ones who provide these services or variations of these services. But what we wanted to try and do, we're always getting questions at ADI about what equipment should we buy, who should we talk to, what should we look for? And we thought actually a starting point would be to start to get some of the people who sell the equipment into this conversation, so you as attendees could get to hear what they have to say and talk to them and ask questions about what it is that they do, but being mindful that there are others and there are more access services. And if, for example, anybody on this webinar today has an idea for another service you'd like us to feature in the future and maybe have on a future webinar, we'd be delighted to receive feedback from you. But with that, I am going to hand over to my colleague, Adrian Caldwell, who is Arts and Disability Ireland's Access and Training Officer, to kind of introduce our speakers and to MC our afternoon. Adrian, over to you.
Thanks very much, Pádraig. So hi everybody, thank you for attending today's webinar. As Pádraig mentioned, my name is Adrian Caldwell and I am the Access and Training Officer with Arts and Disability Ireland. Just a couple of quick things. This session is being recorded and interpreting is being provided by Bridge Interpreting, and we have also captioning available from My Clear Text. I'm just going to pop into the chat an external link to access the captioning transcript. So that should be in the chat now. So just to start things off, I'm going to give a very brief introduction to each speaker and then hand it over to them. Each speaker will present for about 15 minutes each, and then I will let each speaker know when they are coming up to time. I'll give about a 2-minute warning. So if everyone's okay to go, we'll get started. So our first speaker for today is Tim Brown, who is the Managing Director of Apple Sound Limited. Tim has over 4 decades of experience in professional sound system rental and commercial installation. And today, Tim will be speaking about audio description technology in an arts context. So Tim, I'll just spotlight you and hand over to you.
Thanks, Adrian, very much. Good afternoon. So what I'm going to do is run through a brief set of slides and have a chat really about audio description technology. And if I can do that now for you. Adrian can confirm.
Yeah.
You've got my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're going to do is really audio description. We're going to cover sort of generally theatres, galleries, museums, and the like. And what I'm going to do is briefly just give an overview of what's needed, the current technologies available, and an indication of cost, just to give you something to work with. So in a system, these are the main components you're going to need. Obviously, a describer, a microphone for the describer, a transmission system of some kind, and receivers for the audience members. For a describer, if you don't already have access to them, that's something that obviously ADI can help you with. Once you've got your describer, a few things that we suggest you consider. Ask the describer about their own preferences, how they like to work in your venue, if they are indeed familiar with your venue. Where do they want to be seated? Where is it practical? How are they going to see and, of course, hear the performance? And depending on where they're going to be seated, will you need to provide them with show relay so they can hear the performance sound? They might have a preference for head-worn microphone or indeed a handheld microphone. These are the kind of things, just chat through the practicalities of what they're going to do and deliver. One thing, if the describer is going to be positioned in the audience space, be mindful that the describer's voice might well be overheard by audience members, and you can decide whether or not you'll need to take any action to sort of mitigate that. The next part of your system will be some form of transmission. The describer, the microphone, is normally connected to by cable to the transmitter, and you'll need to consider the distance from the describer to the listening audience members. There's obviously a transmission range factor to consider so that you can plan the most appropriate solution. You may need to reposition things if necessary. Then we need to think of our audience members. So they're going to have a receiver of some kind, and then they're going to need a headphone to listen to it. There's a choice of headphones to make, anything from a simple earpiece that sits on an ear, over-ear headphones that allow the ambient sound to be heard as well, and then a range of semi-closed or completely enclosed headphones. So the ears are completely enclosed and you'll hear exclusively then the audio description. So at that point, you might want to think about the audience member's experience for the performance. Do they need to primarily hear the audio description? Will the ambient sound be enough for them to hear the performance? It's worth doing a test in space if you can do in advance. You might want to consider potentially putting the performance sound into enclosed headphones as well, so that the audience member can hear both live sound and the description. And there's ways of controlling that. Current technologies, there's really only sort of three general ones at the moment. Infrared, been around for a long time, uses LED panels to emit infrared light to the receivers. It's less common, less commonly used for audio description particularly. Then we have radio frequency technology, where we've got a radio transmitter to broadcast to the receivers. And then obviously the next and relatively newcomer to the scene is audio over Wi-Fi. And that's where technology uses the existing venue's Wi-Fi network to broadcast audio, typically to members' smartphones for personal listening. So the first option we've got, I'm going to talk about a product called Listen Talk. So this is product related. It's really, if you think of a traditional tour guide system that you'd be familiar with at a tourist attraction or a museum, and this is really reworking, applying some improvements and new technologies to allow it to be used for a multitude of other purposes like audio description. So for bigger venues above 500 seats, you might need to just do a range test to make sure everything's fine for your particular venue. So it's small, very configurable. Key thing is it uses DEC technology, so you don't need to worry about wireless interference to other things or into it, which means it's easier to just walk in and use at a venue. The receiver choice you've got for the listeners on the right-hand side of the screen there, one with a display, one without. Focusing on the one without, so that's extremely simple, nice plain package. You've only got a push button for on-off and then a volume up and a volume down button. That's it. So perfect for this type of application. You'll need some form of charging for it or transportation cases. Various options are available. The system can be used in a completely portable sense, very easy to configure, but there is a Windows configuration software available if you wish to use that. The other system is Listen Wi-Fi. So Listen Wi-Fi here, this is where we use the venue's Wi-Fi network, if it's existing, to transmit the audio to the listeners. It's very simple to use. The component parts, we've got an audio source, which in this case is the describer. There will be an audio input device of some kind. That will then be connected to the Listen Wi-Fi server, and then that provides the link and puts the audio into the Wi-Fi network. Now the listener will either use a smartphone or other device, you know, a laptop or a tablet, for example, that's got an audio output so they can hear it. Then they run a free to download app and then listen using their own choice of headphones. So if they're using a smartphone device, they can download an app. They need to do this either at the venue or before coming. So it's something you need to be wary of. Once they've done that, it's free to use, etc. Doesn't require internet access. It just uses your Wi-Fi network. In bigger venues, it can be used for other things as well, not just audio description. So it could be used for assisted listening and for many other places where there's audio you want to distribute to listeners, but you don't want to use loudspeakers in the spaces. So it could be a gallery or a museum, or if you wanted, for example, if you had a theatre situation, front of house, you could have audio there and separate audio when you move into the venue. One difference with Listen Wi-Fi is great, you can use an app, but that's not necessarily friendly for everybody. So they've introduced a dedicated receiver. So here, very similar to the receivers I've spoken to about earlier on, a nice simple device. It does have a display, but that can be disabled. So then it would work in the same way as the tour guide style system, very basic, and it would just have volume up, volume down, on, off. But the same device can then be used for other purposes where you want to get audio into different spaces. And that's really where Listen Wi-Fi starts to come into its own. Ooh. Right, one before the end. So here we've got some sort of a visual scenario. They're very different spaces, but if you can imagine a multi-purpose venue, you might have a gallery space for a museum. You may have a separate venue where you've got a lecture going on. You might have a bar area, front of house, for example, where you might have show reels running, advanced adverts of upcoming shows, that kind of thing. And then on the bottom right, we've got a sort of main foyer area. So here, with Listen Wi-Fi, if you want, if you have multiple spaces, you can deliver the audio via the Listen Wi-Fi system direct to people's smart devices or the provided receiver. And either the listener can choose what audio they want to listen to, either using the app, which you have complete control over what's on the display. So you could choose the room that you're in, for example, or particular content that you can see, and that would then bring the audio to you as a listener. Same on the device. The display can be used to up-down select audio in different spaces or different content within different spaces. So you could have a multiple screen scenario, as you can see in the bottom. One of the more interesting opportunities for using Listen Wi-Fi is to get location-based sound and provide automation to the audio experience. So in one potential scenario, you could issue a dedicated receiver to a particular listener who wants to hear audio description content. You could issue to them the receiver at front of house, and when they're in that area using this particular technology and one of the accessories that becomes available, that audio would be automatically triggered for front of house. So they might hear a welcome announcement, for example, how to use the system as they move around the venue. But then as the person moves from space to space, the audio can be automatically triggered to deliver the appropriate audio to them within the space that they are located. So they don't have to do anything as far as being a listener. They can just put the receiver onto them, carry it on a neck lanyard, plug in their audio choice of headphones, and off they go. So from front of house, you might go through to the bar area, and the audio would then transfer to bar sound, for example, if there was a screen on, for example, or a pop-up performer in that area. But then if you went into a gallery space, as you go into the gallery, a trigger would then select the appropriate audio for you, making the assumption that you're wanting to hear the audio description track at the moment. As you enter that space, you would then get an audio described audio feed for that particular area, and so on. But it allows you to do it, deliver that audio for audio description, for general sound, so that you can use it as an alternative to loudspeakers. And it can be provided in different languages, for example, or if it was for adults and children, you could have different audio channels appropriate to the listener. So it opens up a whole sort of world of possibilities as an overall venue solution for delivering sound that provides the right audio in the right place at the right time that's specific to the particular listener. A couple of other things just to note, just to think about, sort of the management of having kit. So you choose the appropriate hardware solution for your venue. Obviously, somebody like us can help advise you with that. And a few things just to remember. You need a way of managing at front of house, handing out the devices if there is a device to hand out, and most importantly, how you're going to get those devices back. There'll be some cleaning and sanitizing required. And recharging. If the devices are rechargeable, they'll need recharging before issue the next time. So that's sort of the general pointers at the moment. So to recap, it's a tour guide style system. Radio transmission can be completely portable, or it can be used in a main venue. And then we've got audio over Wi-Fi, which can use smartphone technology, or a dedicated audio receiver. So those are the two main sort of delivery mechanisms for audio description that we provide. And that brings me to the end. So I've managed to do it within 15 minutes, which is an achievement for me. And if there were any questions, they're going to come at the end, as far as I am aware, Adrian.
Yes, thanks very much, Tim. And yeah, almost 15 minutes on the dot. So thanks very much for that. if you can stop share,
I
that
can press stop share.
Yeah, great.
There we go.
Thank you so much, Tim.
No problem,
So
pleasure.
We'll move on to our next speaker, if that's okay. So again, thanks, Tim. And just to remind everyone that contact information and links on all speakers will be circulated to attendees afterwards. So our next speaker is Roger Beaumont, who is the owner of Digital 4, which is the market leader in systems that deliver prepared or live text support for audiences. And today, Roger will be speaking about prepared text for theatre and live events. So I'll just spotlight Roger, and if you're happy to go, you can take it away. Thanks, Roger.
Well, I shall do my best to follow that. Okay, so Roger, I own a company called Digital 4, but I've been involved in the supply of captioning for our client audience of deaf, deafened and the hard of hearing for about 20 years in a number of guises. I was part of the original, in the UK, I think called a See a Voice project, which was Arts Council funded. and I supplied originally 50 caption units and a software application via a charity which some of you may have heard of called Stage Text. And we created a series of captioning hubs where we placed LED displays, single color amber LED displays in groups around the UK. We then trained captioners on the software that we wrote with Stage Text in order to import text into that software and then display it in theatres in what is called verbatim captioning. Okay, now without getting too dry, we'll do a couple of definitions, but verbatim captioning is essentially the process of converting kind of every spoken word in a show into formatted text and then displaying it in the venue in a way that is fully accessible to deaf and hard of hearing audience members. So every word that is spoken that will go on the screen, and every sound effect will be described, as will music be described. And in order to make this work well, you effectively have to have a live captioner, not exclusively, and we'll come on to that a bit later, but certainly when we started 20 years ago, we had a trained captioner who would import the text, put all the character names in, make descriptions of music and sound effects, and would then export that onto an LED display, and it would synchronize the output as the actor spoke. And the industry standard that we created was 3 lines of text on a display, and the bottom line would synchronize with the actor speaking. So were anybody foolish enough to ask me to play Prospero, it would go, "I have done nothing but in care of thee, my dear one, thee, my daughter, who art ignorant of what thou art," etc. And it's the bottom line that synchronizes with the actor. And that's how we started about 20 years ago with Stage Text, when I supplied the screens, and I met Peter Pullen, the founder of Stage Text, and Mervyn, his partner, who introduced captioning into the UK from the States. And so I've had a long association with Stage Text charity, originally as a supplier. Then in their foolishness, they asked me to be their technical director, and I was their technical director for 4 or 5 years. I was still running Digital 4, but we subcontracted, if you like, technical direction to Stage Text. So that's a kind of brief little bit of history of it, and Stage Text very much being an open access organization. So what do I mean by open access? Well, generally open access is where one of our client audience can sit, hopefully anywhere in a theatre, and that access is made available to them, normally on LED displays, but we'll come on to different types of display technology because we use many more now. But open access is important because you can sit anywhere in the theatre and gain access to captioning, be that on LED display, be that on projector, however that's delivered. And one of the important things about open access is that our clients do not need to declare in order to take advantage of the access. Okay, now in the UK, there's probably about 12 million people that have some kind of hearing loss. There's probably 80 to 100,000 people that have BSL as a language, if you like. So there's a lot of people with lots of degrees of hearing loss who can take advantage of captioning, from profoundly deaf people to older gentlemen like myself who are maybe losing their upper register. So if I go and see one of the shows that I'm captioning, I am likely to look at the caption unit 10, 12 times during the performance because of things that I'll miss, particularly for me in the upper register. So I think it's important to remember that captioning offers a service to a massively wide range of people with some kind of hearing impediment or hearing loss, if you like. You know, it's easy to imagine that we think of people being deaf and we think of everybody being profoundly deaf, and that's, you know, not the case, and not the case in access. And it's just kind of important to remember that. So we can deliver open access in a variety of ways. We can take our text, we can put it on LED displays. We can take our text, we can output it via projector. We could take our text and we can put it onto LCD displays. Okay. We now have a wide range of LED displays of different sizes, so that we can deal with studio theatres, mid-sized theatres, large theatres. We can output open access onto video walls using our software. So there's lots of things we can do in terms of open access. Now, there's also then closed access. And what we mean by closed access is that that is captioning access that is delivered on a personal device. Now, commonly, that would be something like an iPad or an Android tablet, okay, where a bit like audio description, it can be delivered locally via the theatre's Wi-Fi, from wirelessly from our captioning laptop, and the text will be delivered again in that format of 3 lines of text, scrolling up onto a personal display device. A tablet, which may be provided by the venue, which is my favorite way, but there we go. It can also, though, be, we also have an app, apps on Apple and Android that you can download on a personal device to wirelessly receive captions. And we can also now output to smart caption glasses. So I was also heavily involved in a project called CaptionQ when I was at Stage Text, which was the precursor of the automatic output to smart caption glasses at the National Theatre. That was undertaken. We undertook, Digital 4 undertook that work. It was grant aided from a Nesta fund. And we were doing 2 things. We were exploring automatic output and output onto smart caption glasses, but mainly actually automatic output so that live captioning could become more ubiquitous, because a lot of all this, sadly, is about money. If you need, for the best practice, you need a live captioner, a trained live captioner. So by the time you pay them maybe £600, now £650 possibly, to prepare an output file for you, and then you hire in screens, it can be that a show, for a single show, could now cost you about £1,000. But the difficulty is, if you're a trained captioner and it's your living and you're charging £600 to make a show, and you're, say, doing, I don't know, 50 shows a year, I mean, you're going to make £30,000 if you physically could do that number of shows, which I imagine would be quite stressful and not possible. So I'm afraid much things in life, quality access is not necessarily cheap to deliver. So we have open access on display, everyone can see, closed access onto devices. And lots of different devices now, as I said, personal devices, tablets, smart caption glasses, projectors, LED displays, video walls. Yeah, and so the smart bit, in a way, is what's happening in the software. And that's where things are now getting quite exciting. We've moved on. We now can do multi-stream output. So presently, I've been doing a lot of projects recently where, from a single laptop, we're creating text bilingually. So we're having one output stream, say, in English, and one output stream in Welsh. And from a single device, we can simultaneously output captions or subtitles on one screen in English and the other screen in Welsh. Similarly, we could do that to a personal display device and give our clients a choice of what language that they wish to receive the captions in, okay? Without taking the thunder of the audio describers, because we now offer multi-stream output, it's also possible to, if you like, pre-record MP3s, say, of audio description, and we can have those as part of an output stream. So quite recently, I did a tour in the UK of a wonderful show called The Village Idiot, which was made as part of a Ramps on the Moon project, Ramps on the Moon being theatre made by a group of theatres in the UK, specifically to be inclusive of people of disability. So we have deaf actors and BSL in the middle of it. But on this show, we had one output stream of captions, one output streams of pre-recorded audio description from the single source, so that every show was captioned and every show had audio description from one operator, and that operator was trained specifically to operate. So there's lots of exciting things going on, not least in my view, that with stage text we were fantastically successful, in my opinion, in making sure that, if you like, every regional theatre was offering some access at some shows, and that was brilliant and wonderful, and it's still the case. We're still working with the RSC, still working with the National, still working with National Theatre of Scotland and in Ireland and in Northern Ireland at regional theatre and above. But what we're managing to do now is to make smaller screens, cheaper licenses, and offer, if you like, in-house training facilities for theatres and smaller companies and smaller venues to create the captioner, be in-house captioners, if you like, train themselves, use our software with cheaper licenses and smaller displays. And we're breaking through that barrier, that sort of upward ghettoization of regional theatre and above, really successfully. So this year, we've got a project at the Edinburgh Festival where we're using mini caption units. We're lodging 4 sets of units with the Edinburgh Fringe, having a download pages for companies to download the software themselves, online training with some support from me on site. And we're going to see if we can beat. Last year, we managed to do over 200 shows at Edinburgh Festival. This year, we're going to try to do something like 600. And that's just a brilliant step forward, because it means that we're working with the new companies, the young companies who will be the future of captioning and the future of access long after I'm gone and dead and buried. So it's really exciting. The other thing I will mention, if I've got any time left, is that I've been largely talking about verbatim captioning, but there is also creative captioning, which is incredibly important. So the stage text model is, if you like, a bit of a parasitic model. People make the shows and then we caption it. Creative captioning is where we're involved at the start of the production process, with the designers, with the theatre makers, with the ensemble. And that is becoming more and more important and done more and more. But again, that's kind of dependent on us training people in-house so that captioning, creative captioning, becomes part of the creative process of the show. So we did, again, a lovely show, lovely version of Much Ado About Nothing, where, because we were working with the designer, we kind of built a video wall into the set, and we had other units around, and we were able to chase the captions around the set and integrate it as a full and proper part of the performance. Just as very excitingly, I've been working with companies where we're integrating the BSL into the performance as opposed to it sitting on the outside of the stage. So it's just a delight to work with BSL interpreters and captioning at the same time, and hopefully audio describers at the same time. So we make some shows which are fully accessible, not as part of the creative process, as well as maintaining the service where we, if you like, post-production access. I'm sure I've forgotten lots of stuff, and I'm sure that I haven't worked hard enough at selling you stuff. But it's a very exciting time in captioning and a very exciting time in access with everything kind of breaking down. We're now, is it access? We're now working with companies who make refugee theatre where we're outputting in Syrian and English. Syrian on one screen, English on the other. I've got a Korean show again with refugees coming up next week. I've been doing loads of work since the invasion of Ukraine, doing captioning, or is it subtitling? Is it access? But does it matter if it's supporting performance for audience and at the same time keeping the conventions of our base audience of deaf and the hard of hearing? So I think that must be close to 15 minutes. I haven't really been keeping check.
Yeah,
but,
very close, very close.
Close but no cigar, as they say. And I'm sure there's lots of questions that I'd be delighted to. I'll take 1 minute just to, I've elbowed my way into audio description. In our software, now, my clear text who are doing this, a great job, I have to say, thank you very much. They can output to a thing called stream text or streamcast, which means they're basically outputting onto a web page or an event live text. Now, we can now open those events in our software. So if you were in a theatre doing a post-show discussion and you wanted that post-show discussion to be live subtitled, you could employ my clear text as to create a remote event, output onto that event, send them a Zoom audio. They can tip-tappy away into the web page. We can open that in our software and it will go to be displayed on any of the display technologies that attach to our software. So 15 minutes, done. Questions?
Thanks so much, Roger. We'll leave questions to the end if that's okay, but thanks very much.
Thank you.
I'll just remove the spotlight. Thanks very much again, Roger. Okay, so our final speaker for today will be Oren McAllister from Navilens. And Oren is the Client Engagement Officer at Navilens and is tasked with developing new relationships and sustaining established partnerships with organizations and users of Navilens around the world. So I'm going to hand over to Oren now to explain what Navilens is. Oren, I'll just spotlight you. So I'll hand over to you now.
Wonderful. Good to go.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you, Roger and Tim, for putting extra pressure on me today. Now, I was feeling quite calm and ready for speaking away, and now I feel that there's definitely a lot of pressure now to live up to that prior explanation from both of you about your products and your services. So anyway, yes, as Adrian has said, my name is Oren McAllister. I work in Navilens, and I'd like to just tell you a little bit about our technology, just to give you a sort of a brief overview and a little bit of history of where we've come from, where we are now, and where we're hopefully going in the future. So just to give a brief overview, what is Navilens? Many people may not have heard of it yet, but for sure, most of you pass it on a regular basis. But let me explain a little bit more about that initially, or later, sorry, and initially tell you that Navilens is an innovative technology which helps people who are blind or partially sighted to access information and navigate in unfamiliar situations, unfamiliar surroundings. So the idea for Navilens came about from a realization by our CEO that blind and visually impaired people are not autonomous in unfamiliar situations, that traditional signage that is available to everyone, per se, is not actually accessible to them. So Navilens is actually the product of a startup company called New Systems Technology. Nuevos Sistemas Tecnologías is my very fancy Spanish. It was a company that originally worked a lot with large organizations, helping them to resolve logistical problems. So they would help them to discover the problems and then also help them to solve those particular problems. But our CEO, from personal experience, he always felt that he wanted to do something that benefited people a little bit more, that actually had more of a soul to it. And that's when this idea came about trying to help people who are blind or visually impaired. So the company decided that what they wanted to do was to try and find some way of helping people to access that same information, not claiming to replace traditional signage, but basically to be there to complement it and to help visually impaired people get their independence back. So to do this, our Navilens created a 2D colorful code, which can be programmed to contain the same information as the signage, and which the mobile application then reads to the users, allowing them to be more independent in their daily lives. Now, when this problem was first addressed, the original thought was, well, okay, why don't we just use QR codes? QR codes have become a staple now in everyday life. In particular, over the last few years, I know that prior to the pandemic, I had some awareness of QR codes, but I think now we are definitely, most of us anyway, are very, very familiar with the power that they have. But for someone who is visually impaired, the QR codes don't work very well. The issue with the QR code is that you need to know where the code is. You need to be able to then frame the code, and then you need to access the link to that information that is contained within the code. So I know that I struggle myself accessing that information sometimes, finding it, the little tab that you need to click on inside the camera. So if I can have issues with that, then we can understand that it can be extremely even more difficult for anyone who is sight impaired. So they realized then that without the ability to use the QR code, they needed to develop a new type of code, a code that could be read more easily, that code that could be a little bit more powerful. So a partnership was formed with the University of Alicante to try to create a new type of scannable code that could be read from further away and could be automatically detected by the camera of the mobile device. So after 5 years of intense research and development, the Navilens code was created. So how does it work? So by simply placing the Navilens code in a particular location, all the user needs to do is simply move the mobile device around, and the application, the Navilens app, will automatically detect any valid codes in the vicinity. And once detected, the app will then direct you to the code, and then on arrival, you will have automatic access to the information allocated to that code. So our codes are different because the codes can be detected at over 12 times the distance of a QR code. They can also be detected at extreme angles, so within a 160-degree range. There's lightning fast detection in 0.03 seconds. It's readable in all light conditions, and it also provides the information in 36 different languages. So the code was created. The first thing to do in 2017, so 6 years ago, the code was finally created, was to test out the code. Does it work in real life? It worked in the labs, it worked in the trials, but we needed to take it out. So the first big test was at a trade fair in Madrid. This was a trade fair run by the National Association of the Blind here in Spain called ONCE, and it's one of their biggest events of the year. And basically all they had to do, or all they did, was place a Navilens code next to the names of each of the companies that had a stand at the trade fair. And just even by placing those codes with the name of that company, it completely changed that experience for all of the attendees who were blind or partially sighted. It created a whole new experience. Many of the attendees were in shock that they were able to detect this information without having to rely on assistance, without relying on help to get people to provide that information for them. There was also some wayfinding placed in and around the trade fair as well. So it enabled people to be able to maneuver their way around without, again, that additional assistance. The feedback was amazing. There was a lot of positive feedback because people who generally were so dependent on others found this new level of independence again, that they could do some things by themselves again. So based on that feedback, Navilens then decided to approach transportation. Transportation was the initial hurdle that Navilens focused on. It's one of the most significant barriers for people who are blind or visually impaired, especially in order to go about their daily activity, go to work, visit family. So that was naturally the first step. So one of our first pilot projects was in Barcelona on the bus system there. And basically, just by simply adding the Navilens code to the bus stop, it not only made the bus stop visible to visually impaired people, but also provided directional instructions on how to arrive to that bus stop safely. And then on arrival, you would automatically receive the real-time information for the next buses and their destination. So the Transport Authority in Barcelona was so impressed and received such great feedback from all of the trials that they did, that they've now put Navilens codes on all of their bus stops throughout the entire city of Barcelona, as well as all of the metro as well. So naturally, this created a bit of a buzz here in Spain, and the rest of Spain followed suit. So Murcia, Valencia, Zaragoza, Alicante, and now more recently, Madrid are putting Navilens codes on all 5,500 of their bus stops. So again, providing information as to where the bus stop is, how to get there, and then on arrival, the real-time information of that bus stop. They are doing so in the space of 8 weeks. So there is a quick turnaround on some of these projects. So it definitely keeps us on our toes. They're also working on Madrid on the metro system there as well. So they've currently completed line 8, which links the airport to the center of Madrid, where they have created a full implementation of Navilens, providing wayfinding assistance within the stations, including tactile paving, and also assistance on helping to access information points and how to get assistance if and when is required. So from Spain, it has gradually started to grow. So we have been working in various cities around the world, and one of the most recent implementations that has restarted, because this did start before the pandemic, has been in New York City, where the state of New York have been able to guarantee $2 million of federal funds in order to amplify Navilens use across the city of New York and the state. So this is all a starting process. This is a big project, but we are moving out into many, many other locations: Singapore, Australia, Dubai, Paris, Los Angeles. So the list is endless, and we continue to grow exponentially. So although transport was incredibly important to us, we also knew that the codes could work in various other ways. And this leads us on to the year 2020, when Kellogg's decided that they wanted to celebrate World Sight Day by creating accessible packaging. So they spoke to the RNIB in the UK. They wanted to put tactile packaging, but also Braille on their packaging. And the RNAB did point out to them that, 30% of people can read Braille. With an aging population, more and more of our older generations, and this affects me personally, and probably some of you also, my parents have sight problems. So learning Braille in your 70s and 80s is not an easy task. So the RNAB put Kellogg's in contact with Navilens, and this is when our first project started, with their first fully accessible packaging by placing Navilens and having Braille in the packaging on Cocoa Pops. So the feedback again on that was amazing. There were a lot of people who were overwhelmed by this idea that they could go, and even if it was only just one product, they were still able to find that product unaided in a supermarket in an intimidating scenario. So Kellogg's has since, based on that, have now placed Navilens codes on all of their products. And they will be moving into some of their other sister products as well. So not only are we working with Kellogg's, but a number of other organizations as well, such as Procter & Gamble's brands, Pantene, Ariel, Lenore, oh dear, I'm going to forget things now, but there are a variety of products, and there will be more products coming out again this year. And Bessie's, for anyone who's familiar with frozen foods, we also worked on a campaign with Coca-Cola at Christmas, and we are working on a number of global brands also, and are in conversations with quite a number who are very interested in making their products more accessible. So not only have we seen product accessibility and transport, but we're also now seeing a wide variety of interest and uses of NaviLens in many locations, such as universities, schools, offices, blind and visually impaired associations, even now with parks, music festivals, museums, art galleries, health centers, campsites. Theatre is a particular interest of my own because I love theatre, and it would be a very personal and enjoyable experience for me to be able to work with within that industry. Now, as part of my role, I communicate directly with many of our users of our technology, people who are blind or visually impaired, whose lives have been changed by using NaviLens. This is a critical element of our continued development to ensure that we achieve the highest level of customer satisfaction and do not rest on our laurels. We feel that we don't feel what we have is enough. We strive to improve and better the experience to suit all levels of sight loss. One of the additional focuses, so the most important thing to us are the people that use our applications. So the blind, the visually impaired people who rely on our technology. And as such, we always have a very baseline rule, and that is that any users of our application should never, ever, ever pay to use or access these codes. That would be on the responsibility of the companies themselves. But this is vital for us because we understand that so many people with any kind of disability is living within certain restrictive means, and we want to ensure that at the end of the day that they have access to this without any need to pay for that. So downloading the applications are free and use of the applications is free. We also want to ensure that when people scan the codes that they never need to provide any personal or private information. Privacy is of the utmost importance to us at NaviLens, and we never ask any of our users to provide any personal details. There is one case where we do, but that is only in order to provide them with an additional service. And this leads me on to my next point, in that it's vitally important for us to allow people to be able to access our codes and to be able to use them on a personal level. And as such, we provide free access to NaviLens codes through our application. So just by downloading the NaviLens app, you can access these free codes, and they come in a variety of sizes that people can print off and that they can use at home to for want of a better word, to NaviLens. Yeah, I'm afraid we have turned it into a verb. So we allow them to NaviLens parts of their home. So people use them on such objects such as luggage, putting it on spices. The NaviLens codes can be that small. On tea, coffee, sugar, frozen produce. As many people who are blind or visually impaired know, when you freeze something, it tends to lose its smell. It is very handy to be able to put these codes on any product, any item, even on your Roomba. I'm not sure what it's called in Ireland. I think it's a robotic vacuum cleaner, which can sometimes run out of power while it's out and about. Just by putting a NaviLens code on that means that you can find it if it runs out of battery charge. The remote control, one particular user tells me that she loves to put one of these codes onto her remote control because her husband never puts it back in the correct place. So there are so many different uses for these codes, for labeling clothing, but basically any uses that anybody can find in order to help access information and things that people use on a day-to-day basis.
2 minutes left, Oren.
2 minutes. I will run right through this very quickly. So, and then you can also sign up to access 1,000 of these free codes. So basically you can NaviLens anywhere. 2 more things. One of the other things is that we do provide free NaviLens kits. These kits can be used by schools, associations, and also by medical and health centers, where these are pre-programmed codes. So any of these locations can use these codes, print them out, and use them to indicate common areas and common objects in and around their facilities. And then one last thing before I'm kicked off, which I'm sure you wouldn't do that, Adrian, but we just want to say that inclusivity is incredibly important to us. So although our main focus is to assist blind and visually impaired people, it is crucial that everyone can use our technology. As such, we have two applications. So we have NaviLens, which provides audible information for people with sight loss. And then we have NaviLens Go, which is the sister app which functions for everyone else. NaviLens Go can be used to provide information for people with low vision, so providing larger text, cognitive difficulties, so simplified, easy to read text, and also pictograms also. For deaf users, so you can upload sign language videos to these codes, and it can also help people with mobility problems by creating accessible routes. Also for children, content for kids, so suitable content and educational content for children. And again, it can also help with language barriers. So the information can be provided, automatically translated into up to 36 different languages. I'm going to stop talking now and answer any questions that you may have at the end. All right, thank you so much for your time.
That's great. Thanks so much, Oren. I'll just remove the spotlights and okay, thanks very much, Oren, and thanks again to all our speakers today. Just a reminder that the session is being recorded and will be available on the Arts and Disability website. So if there's anything that you want to watch back, it will be available to do so. And we will be posting all the relevant contact information for each speaker. We have some time now for a Q&A just with each of today's speakers. So if you want to put that in the Q&A function, that would be great. Pádraig, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just by way of a little bit of context to add in there for Oren, the first time I saw NaviLens being used was with the Glucksman down in Cork. And this just in terms of our colleagues from galleries and museums, it might be an additional context that people find useful. So essentially, Ty Crowley, who's one of the curators down at the Glucksman at UCC in Cork, he trained with ADI as an audio describer a few years ago, and essentially last summer for an exhibition called Fashion Show at the Glucksman, Ty created a series of written texts which written text, and he then also created some audio descriptions which were audio files, and depending on where and which codes were positioned by the artworks at the exhibition Fashion Show, as you worked your way around the gallery, you were given, if they were short pieces of text, it was a synthesized voice through the NaviLens app. And if it was his audio description, you got this gorgeous Cork accent delivering all the visuals of the different exhibits from Thaig. So just to, I suppose, just by way of context, explain that, you know, the system, as Oren said, started on really big scale from a transport point of view, but has now got adapted in loads of different ways and is very, very flexible. And therefore, for something like audio description, whether it is pre-recorded audio tracks or pieces of text, you know, that are synthesized, you can, or both, you know, you can have a quite a rich experience in terms of moving through the gallery space with audio description. And I just wanted to add that in as an example, and also, you know, just to give a bit of a shout out to the Glucksman who have used the system. So back to you, Adrian.
Thanks, Pádraig. Just going to add the spotlight again. So just I have a question here for Oren, if that's okay, and I'll add you to the spotlight. So I'm just going to read this out. So if I understand NaviLens correctly, people need an app by NaviLens for it to work most smoothly. However, if we use NaviLenses but gallery visitors don't have the app, does the code work in the same way as a QR code where visitors are still directed to the content, or will visitors be prompted to download the app for it to work? I'm just thinking in situations where visitors might not want to download an app in that moment to access the content.
Yes. Okay. So of course, naturally, with it being such a new type of technology, I mean, QR codes have been around for 29 years. So they've actually been around for quite some time. So I think it was a natural progression for smartphones to automatic, because they were being used everywhere, particularly during the pandemic, although I think the phone cameras could detect them before then. So that was a natural progression. It is something that we're trying to work on, but that will come with more awareness, where we will be able to be recognized directly through the phone camera itself. So for the moment, the application is required in order to access that specific information that is being linked to those codes. Now, we have in the meantime come up with a little bit of a cheat, as you can imagine, which is a dual app clip. So this is an app clip, which is in effect a QR code that we're now using with most of our NaviLens codes to enable anybody who is not familiar with NaviLens to be able to access that information. Now, with NaviLens Go, what the QR code, when scanned along with the NaviLens code, will do, it will actually open up NaviLens Go without having to download the application. So you can actually access that information without necessarily having to download the application itself. But because of the needs from within the NaviLens app, so providing audible information, providing the 360 wayfinding, providing all of the additional facilities, you would need the application for the moment, until we can convince Apple and Google and all of these different companies to make NaviLens codes accessible directly through the camera. It would be required. So yes, it's just a little bit more complicated with the NaviLens application itself. You would be required to download that. And I understand that not everyone does want to download it, but this is also a conversation I've had with other companies who are also developing systems where they can actually, for example, at a university that has its own University Go application, and they don't want their students downloading millions of other applications. So what they've actually developed is a way that they can jump out of the university application, jump into NaviLens, scan the code, and jump back in again. I'm making it very, very basic. I'm sure there's a lot of technical detail there, but it's basically a system of having the application, but not necessarily having to open it every time, that using it in that way. So we are constantly working on these things. We do want to improve this experience, but for the time being, we do have that ability to at least access the application, NaviLens Go, without downloading it, but also being able to access the downloadable version of NaviLens.
Okay, great. Thanks, Oren. Just going to remove the spotlight. This might be a question for Porrick. Is there funding available to purchase access equipment?
God, I thought you knew all the answers to that question. Yes, there is. And in fact, yourself and myself have been talking to various people about this. So hold on a second. Yeah. So essentially, yes, both the capacity building funding that the Arts Council provide does allow for the purchase of small to medium-sized kind of capital devices and equipment, and also the Department of Culture also have their own new funding scheme, which only opened last week, which will allow, which is a pilot access funding that's going to run for the next 3 years. I think it is called Stream E. So yeah, there is funding available And you know, I suppose one of the tricky areas about getting funding is that some funding schemes do require 3 quotes, and actually sometimes getting 3 quotes in a very for every piece of equipment you want to buy in such specialist areas or unique areas sometimes can be a bit tricky.
Great, and I'm just going to put in a link to the information on the Cultural Capital Scheme Stream E in the chat. If anyone else has any other questions, please put them into the Q&A.
Can I ask a question, actually? A bold question. Let's talk about money, lads. How much, and I think we can just go around on the 3 of you. You know, Tim, you spoke first. Kind of what, just in terms of, you know, in very general, and I don't want to hold you to quotes. It's more to get a general sense in terms of from, you know, portable radio transmission receiving setup through to a Wi-Fi setup for audio description. Maybe I suspect that the one that you showed where you can have multiple functionality within a whole venue is probably quite bespoke. But what sort of costs are you talking about?
Yeah, sure. Unfortunately, they were actually in my slideshow, but whilst I'd been creating it, I'd hidden them. So they didn't show.
I thought I was visually impaired and couldn't see them. Sorry about
no,
that.
you weren't. No, you weren't. So my error. If I can do that. And I don't know whether if Adrian can share that. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Great. So this is what I was going to show. So very quickly, entry level, 1 describer, 3 receivers, completely portable. So recharge it, put it in the zippy pouch, and off you go. So that's the way to start. £1,641 for that. Next. This is just a second example of a system. If you have a cased system, there's 16 charging slots, describer kit, and then receivers for 15 listeners with headphones. And there's 5,202, and obviously these are pounds sterling. Wi-Fi entry level is a 2-channel server. So this presumes you have an existing Wi-Fi network that you can connect this to. All you will need, and in many cases it is plug and play, is just to plug this in, £209. That then will deliver the content to the app available on Android and iPhones. And then if you want to have receivers, you can just purchase receivers much in the same way as the Listen Talk system and provide receivers at front of house for visitors. So that's the sort of two systems and some examples to give you some of the costs.
Right. Okay, that's great. And Roger, over to you, because you've spoken about small screens and you know, right up to the types of screens that we would use in the Abbey. And I'm just curious about your small, you know, about the range in terms of cost of screens and packages, because a lot of our venues, very similar to the regional and smaller venues that you spoke of, you know, are anything from, yes, we have some venues that are over 2,000 seats, but the majority of our venues, I'm being very general here, are more likely to be 400 to 100 seats. So kind of what sort of is the range of, let's say, setup for, you know, that 400 seater venue, maybe down to the 100 seater?
Okay, well, you can sort of divide this up into, I don't know, hardware and software, really, and then open and closed captioning, So we go with closed captioning first. So you can output onto an Android tablet, and that could be something like, I don't know, the RSC. You're just buying some tablets from us. They're having 8-inch and 10-inch tablets, and they're probably about £190 each to £250 each. They're also buying some smart caption glasses. I can tell you what they are. They are the RRP or the SRP on those is £1,005 a pair, right? And that's just so we're a trade supplier of those glasses and make a small margin on those at that. So that's kind of closed captioning. With open access, as I said, we make different size screens with the LEDs with 2.5mm, 4mm, and 5mm pitch. They will range from 3,000 to about 6,500. It's in our intention in the next 6 months to introduce another range, which are kind of robust second screen LED displays, and they will range from about, again, the smallest, probably about 2,000 up to, well, they could go into an opera house. So that's just depending on the LEDs, but starting at 2 up. We license the software, and if you're a large venue, it's $995 for the first year, and then $395 onwards. If you're a small venue, it's $395 for the first year, $195 onwards, for which you get the consultation, software upgrades, remote support, blah, blah. But bearing in mind, and this is true of everything, that we are nothing without the captioners. Without captioners, we have no content. So you've either got to train your own captioners or pay captioners. And similarly with audio describers, you know, without the content, we are nothing, basically. So that is a very real cost that needs to be thought about too. Then you need laptops and cables and brackets and stuff. But those are the significant costs are the ones that I've covered.
And then thank you for that, Roger. And then Oren, over to yourself. I know you spoke about the fact that you provide free NaviLens codes, but I'm sure, how does it work, let's say, for a gallery or museum who regularly wants to use NaviLens? You know, I presume the codes are reusable, but they probably have to pay a subscription for those codes. How does that work?
Yeah, so generally it's software as a service. So there's that usual sort of initial sign up cost. So it all, and again, it all depends on the size of the project in general, how much of the work is going to be put in place from our side, and basically how big a project it will be. So there is always that initial fee, but that's always a one-off fee that would be paid at the beginning. And then there is a cost for each particular code. And again, that cost can differ depending on the number of codes that are required. So generally, the more codes, the lower the price becomes. And then there is the very small fee, which would be the fee of maintaining the codes on a monthly basis. Now, that would be the ultimate fee. So the initial stage would always be a little bit more costly because that's the implementation, the creation of everything. But after that, this is sustaining the codes and sustaining the program within a facility is actually quite cheap. Now, everybody asks for a ballpark figure, and it's just so difficult to give that, because it's, on one hand, you have Kellogg's that sell 300 million products around the world, and compare it with maybe a small local brand that's producing a smaller product. It wouldn't be the same. It would just be taken, really, the context would be taken into consideration. But we do also provide special offers for nonprofit organizations, for educational institutions, for nonprofit organizations that work with the visually impaired and with people who are blind. So there are certain special offers out there to make it more affordable for those who are on a tighter budget.
So in other words, what you're saying is it's quite bespoke, and that's very much the model you work with, although you have the the same component parts, be it licenses, be it codes, be it the software. It's the scaling up and the kind of working through, or the initial kind of setup. That's where the costs are, but it varies depending on the size of the organization and whether they're a not-for-profit or not, and whether they're working directly with the blind people, and they're also whether they're working in maybe an educational context, etc. So it's very much bespoke, is essentially.
Pretty much
Okay,
so.
that's
It's
great.
difficult.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Makes perfect sense. Adrian, I see a question which I'm gonna I let you take in. I think it's about the future of technology. Maybe you want to take that one up. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. So just these last two questions are directed towards Tim. So Tim, I'll just ask them. So I'll just ask the first one and then we can go on to the next one. Regarding audio equipment, how quickly is the technology changing? Is there new technology coming through that we should be aware of before we start looking at purchasing anything anytime soon? You're just on mute there.
We go. Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Thanks for the question. Yeah, the two technologies I spoke about, the Listen Talk, the technology is DECT that it's using, which has been around for a very long time, global technology, so very unlikely to change. So that is an advantage of using that type of system to deliver a wireless solution for audio description. Mainly the other radio systems, and certainly over the last 10, 20 years, radio frequency allocation does change, and there have been a couple of big changes in the UK. But there's nothing on the cards at the moment. Most of that's stabilized. So there's no foreseeable change on that front. Wi-Fi, it is what it is, and again, a global technology, so any change is likely to be slow and incremental, not a step change. So that's another reason for using Wi-Fi to deliver that particular technology. The system itself is from one particular manufacturer, and so you do have, some an element of risk at that point. Future technologies, to be fully aware, Bluetooth is probably the next step for delivering content to the public. If anyone's interested, you just Google Bluetooth Auracast. Auracast is AURACAST, Auracast. You can learn more. So that's using something that's been developed by the Bluetooth user group. The manufacturer I've given details on today, Listen Technologies, is one of the members of the Bluetooth user group. And that's a future technology. It's out now, it's been developed. And that, if anyone's familiar with using Bluetooth headsets, etc., it's one-to-one. There are some exceptions for mobile communications, but generally it's a one-to-one. You have a pair of headphones, you have an audio source, that's it. You have a headset for that you can use with your mobile phone, for example, but you can't then share that with 200 other people. It's not possible. Auracast gets around that and provides broadcastable audio that can requires no login or selection. If you have a compatible set of Bluetooth headphones and you've set them to allow broadcast audio in, the idea is to allow things like places like theatres and performance spaces to provide their audio description and assisted listening direct to the person's Bluetooth device. Sounds great. It's there. It's released almost 2 years ago as a technology, but the timescale, whilst the headphones and devices you buy brand new now are Auracast compatible, there's yet to be a bold manufacturer to be first to develop a delivery transmitter system. So there isn't one yet. and Bluetooth are forecasting that equipment should become available over the next 5 to 7 years. So we're looking fairly long term, and of course it requires globally a general uptake and adoption of Bluetooth Auracast to deliver and broadcast audio in public spaces, airports, train stations. Very interesting listening to Oren before. Bluetooth Auracast can help in those circumstances, but it's going to require sort of global adoption, which is going to take a long time. So as far as investing now is concerned, the technologies certainly recommendable would be a radio frequency system, such as the one I've described, audio over Wi-Fi. Infrared it is slowly disappearing. A couple of the main manufacturers and one of the biggest discontinued manufacturing of infrared systems a short while ago. That should summarize it, I hope.
Yeah, and just one other question for you, Tim.
Yeah.
Is there a combination kit for audio equipment so that both Wi-Fi to use with smartphones and receivers for those who may not have a smartphone could be available?
Very good question to clarify. Yes. Perhaps that didn't come across quite as well as it should have done. Listen Wi-Fi is a way of delivering audio through Wi-Fi to a smart app on a product, but at the same time you use the same Wi-Fi network to if you need to provide a device to somebody where they don't or can't use the app, then that device would be handed out in the same way as a tour guide style receiver would be, and they would just receive the audio only into that device, and it can be the functionality can be disabled, so it is just a receiver of audio. It doesn't do anything else, so that it is super simple and ideal for things like audio description and assisted listening. And it's the same. So it's the same system. So if you buy a Listen Wi-Fi server, deploy audio over Wi-Fi in your venue, that can be picked up either by a device with the app or by a physical device that you buy from the system. And of course, you only need to buy one. That gets you going. You can buy as many as you need.
Great. Thanks very much, Tim. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A box, and we are coming close to time, so we might leave it at that, if that's okay. Thanks to all of our speakers today and to everyone who attended. Again, this is being recorded and will be available on the Arts and Disability website, along with all the relevant contact information and websites. Porrick, is there anything that you want to add just before we finish?
No, just to thank Tim, Roger and Oren for their presentations. I think it's been great to get kind of into the technology and start to talk about it. And I think we've had some very interesting lessons in access and approaches and ethos in terms of why we all do what we do, in terms of providing access and making access technology available. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to our audio, to our captioners, our captioner, and our two sign language interpreters as well. And Adrian, just back to you to say your farewells.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just to reiterate, thanks to Bridge Interpreting and MyClearText for providing both captioning and sign language interpretation today. So thanks very much, everybody, and we will hopefully see you at the next webinar. Thanks very much.
Thank you
So much. Thank you, everyone.